Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick, and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sue Carrick, and it's lovely to have you join me. Dementia is currently the second leading cause of death amongst Australians and the leading cause of death for women in our country. It's estimated that in 2023 there are more than 1.5 million Aussies caring for someone living with dementia, and given our ageing population, this figure is only set to rise. If you haven't already come face to face with the cruel disease or known someone afflicted, the chances are that sadly one day you will. My guest today is Sarah Jones, author of Dementia Who Are You and What Have You Done With My Mother? Sarah's mum, Jeannie Somerville, was diagnosed with dementia in 2014. It was this diagnosis, coupled with the lack of resources and reading materials available for those undergoing similar circumstances and experiences with loved ones, that prompted Sarah to put pen to paper and write about her own journey with her mother's dementia in the hope that it would help others. So let's go and join the conversation. Welcome, Sarah. It's lovely to have you join me on the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
Thanks, Sue. It's lovely to be here.
Now, we're going to be talking about dementia today and how, it's so on the rise. And, I mentioned the stats in the introduction. But before we talk about that and your book, I wondered if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. Yep. I'm trained as a primary school teacher. So I haven't worked full-time as a primary teacher for quite some time, but I have 4 children, 4 adult kids that are all still living at home. So we have a very full house. And yes, I just work part-time in a administration job at the moment, but I do some part-time teaching as well. And lots of work. And also, obviously, a lot of my time was taken up looking after mum when she was sick, and my dad's also elderly, so he takes a bit of time as well.
Yes, and that happens to many of us. In the situation of that sandwich generation where you're looking after your parents as well as looking after your children, and also getting to the stage where, it can sometimes become too much for you. So before we get into your book and that, I'd like you to tell me about your mum before, what she used to be like.
Yeah. Oh, she was a great mum. I feel so blessed to have had a mum like mum. She was very vivacious and bubbly and outgoing. She was always like the life of the party whenever we went anywhere. She was very compassionate and caring and selfless. She'd be the mum who'd wake up in the middle of the night to pick us up from somewhere if we were stuck. She was just great. She took time to get to know our friends, and she was very involved at school and with everything we were doing. She was always very actively involved, and she had a great sense of humor. She was very funny and also very intelligent. She loved learning, and she really instilled that into us. My brother and I, there was only 2 kids in our family, but she really spent a lot of time teaching us things and teaching us to value learning. She was very well read, and she was just a great mum.
And also, she liked to exercise and the learning keep her mind and her brain active as she got older. And so she was living quite a healthy life from what I could understand in terms of trying to look after herself from the exercise point of view and also keeping that cognitive work going with crosswords and that sort of thing. So it must have come as a bit of a shock to her and to you and the family to realize that not all was as it should be.
That's right. Yeah, it's always in the back of your mind, but little things started to happen and we think, oh, should we be worried about that? So around her 70th birthday, she started to grasp for the right word in the sentence. She'd just be forgetting words. We thought, oh, well, that's just old age. That happens to me all the time.
That's
And
right.
then there'd be more things. You can relate to that, yeah.
Yeah, I
And then
can.
she'd
I
just be
can.
repeating herself. So saying, yeah, she'd say a story and then a few minutes later say another story. And you'd think, oh, I wonder if mum realizes she just told me that. And then the things she would be forgetting became more, well, they were bigger things. So she'd drive to the shops and walk home, forget that she'd taken a car, or the other way around, she'd walk to the shops and then look for a car in the car park for half an hour. She'd forget how to get to places in her local area where she'd lived for 49 years. Yeah, there were just a lot more alarming things happening. And so we thought, oh, this could be dementia, but we just didn't really want to entertain that idea. But we just thought if we get her to the doctor, we'll get a scan basically so that we could allay our fears and she wouldn't have it. That was the last thing we wanted. But yeah, it was a hard thing to come to terms with in the
I think
beginning.
the other,
And she was
yeah,
quite reluctant.
yes, yeah. Well, as you were saying things like, I mean, I'll go to the car park and forget where I've parked my car. However, in saying that, I've always been like that, as my children will tell me. I took them to a school, I don't know, speech night or something, and it was at a convention centre, and we came out, I couldn't find the car, and after looking around, realised we were on the wrong floor. So they never let me forget that. But these sort of things that happen as we get older, where we walk into a room and we don't know why we've walked in there, things like that. So for me, I wouldn't think about getting tested, but now that you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, well, should I go and perhaps, have a test to see, if I'm really starting to do those sort of things on a more regular basis?
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's the regular basis part, because I can also relate to losing my car. I've done that many times. But yeah, it's just there was just something different about mum. She wasn't her normal sharp self. And yeah, you just things were out of the ordinary. Like for instance, once she made breakfast for dad, bacon and eggs and everything. And then she packed that away. And within half an hour, she'd got everything back out and started making breakfast
Mm,
again. So it was a bit
mm,
beyond the normal thing. You'd start to excuse them away and think, oh no, she's just a normal self, but she's just forgetful. But then it started to become a bit more apparent. Like she'd have dings in the car that she couldn't explain. And dad would say, oh,
mm.
have you had an accident? She'd say, I don't remember, and people would be calling us that mum had made an appointment with and she wouldn't remember who that was, or it just became a lot worse and
Yes,
more
yeah.
pronounced, I suppose.
Yeah, and how did your dad feel about this? Because I would assume he was in his 70s as well. Um,
Yep. Yeah, he's just a couple of years older than mum. So he was, I suppose, in more denial than we were. Uh, and I guess because mum's at home in her routine, he didn't notice it as much. And they did a few things together, but they had formed this relationship where they did a few things apart as well. So they weren't always in each other's pockets.
mm,
My brother and I would probably notice it more because we hadn't seen, we'd have a week apart with visits or something, and dad's there all the time, so he didn't really notice it as much. It was only when mum came to stay with us that we really noticed how bad it had become. And then we mentioned that to Dad, and he was still quite reluctant to admit there was anything too much wrong. She did start to drink heavily, which was a bit of a warning sign. And at the time, we didn't realize that was a dementia symptom, this obsessive sort of behavior. So Dad was concerned about her drinking for sure, but didn't think it was dementia. Didn't really understand what was happening.
And as you said, they sort of go into a bit of denial because there's a lot, we hear about dementia and sort of the way people deteriorate and they don't recognise you and so forth. But I think, am I getting that muddled up with Alzheimer's? Because there a difference between dementia and Alzheimer's?
Yeah, I think that's a common misconception that Alzheimer's sort of equals dementia, but dementia is like an umbrella term for a whole lot of different types of dementia. So Alzheimer's is definitely dementia. That's one type, and that's the most common. It's primarily to do with memory. They all are to do with memory, but just the cognitive ability to have form relationships and just have to be able to remember things and recall things. Mum had frontal temporal lobe dementia, which is slightly different. And that can mean a personality change, which is what we noticed as well. And it's quite subtle. So only if you're close to the person can you really notice, because she presented it in a fairly normal way, but it was just so uncharacteristic. And we could pick that up because we knew her so well. There's also, Lewy body. There's lots of other dementias as well.
No, that's fine.
Under
You
that umbrella.
yeah. No, I was just going to say probably when she started drinking heavily, that was out of character as well. So, that's all to do with that frontal lobe dementia. But I think the important thing to do is, what do you do when you start to see these signs? Because normally the person themselves won't do anything because they may not want to acknowledge it. But what do? You were the daughter. So what steps did you take? Because it must have been difficult trying to get your mum to acknowledge it.
It was really difficult. It was awful, actually. So we thought if we could just get her to a GP, then we could get a referral and maybe see a geriatrician to prove to her that there was nothing wrong. We just said, Mum, at least if you go, we can prove that there's nothing wrong. But I think the first thing we did was actually got an ACAT assessment, and they were fantastic. They sent a doctor and a nurse out to our house, and they had a little interview with Mum. She was not very happy about it, but she did comply. She was a bit aggressive at that point, which was another thing that was very uncharacteristic for Mum. So they carried out this little, mini memory test, and she did not go very well in that. And then they also said, you need to go and see a doctor. So we did go to the GP, and he said, I'm going to refer you to a geriatrician. And then he showed us the scans of Mum's brain. She had a brain scan, and he showed us the brain scan results, and it was quite shocking because you could see that the physical brain had actually shrunk, and that was awful seeing that. And he said, you have dementia, and Mum just flipped out. She said, that's rubbish. I do not, and stormed out of the room, which, again, this is all symptoms of the disease that we just didn't realize. Yeah, so that was a very hard diagnosis to acknowledge for her and for Dad.
Yeah. And do they have like a time frame? Like, for example, sometimes when, with my dad and mum both had cancer, and mum defied the odds of, living for 10 years, but Dad, they said, well, you've got 6 months, and that was about it. So do they have a time frame, or is it something that is an unknown quantity?
Yeah, I wanted to know that. Some people said 10 years from diagnosis, some people said 5 years. I think it really does depend on the type of dementia and the individual, how healthy they are to start with, and because the rate at which you decline does depend on the individual. I've noticed that just visiting mum and seeing the people that she was with. It really did vary quite a lot. So it was 8 years from diagnosis to when she passed away. And yeah, quite a steep decline in that time. Yeah, but my mother-in-law has had Alzheimer's, and she was a lot quicker, I think, in the decline. Yeah, it's probably only 5 years.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And so what happened? Like obviously you get to a point where you need to be cared for. So, and I would assume that your dad wasn't in that position, or even maybe you or the family. So, what are the next steps that you had to go through?
Well, we really wanted to try and keep mum at home if we could. And dad he was semi-prepared, but I don't think he realised how much care she would need, because they were both pretty independent. He'd be off at the gym and going for walks and doing these sorts of things. And so it would have meant he would have had to be home with her or take her with him everywhere he went. So that was probably not really very feasible. Also, she stayed with us as a bit of a trial to see how that would go. And in the middle of the night, she was getting up, forgetting where the toilet was, and she was, going to the toilet in other rooms, and she was jumping into bed with my daughters. She was out in the street in the middle of the night. So it was too hard. We just thought, oh, this is not going to work. So and you have this terrible feeling of guilt, of putting your mother in a nursing home. It's just because she'd been verbal about it earlier in her life, saying I'd never want to end up in a nursing home, but we felt like we really had no choice. And the place, she had 2 different places. We started with respite care for 3 weeks, which was a nice transition. We said to her, you're just gonna have like a bit of a holiday in this place, and then hopefully with a view to staying on if it worked out. That particular place didn't actually work out, so we ended up at another place, which was fantastic. We were so happy with the carers, and yeah, it was really great. So
Because yeah, that's so important. I mean, we my mother-in-law got quite ill. She was 90, and they didn't expect her to live, and they said she's going into care. And we felt guilty because she never wanted to go into there. Fortunately for her, she recovered and ended up living till she was 94, and this little Italian lady running the aged care home practically. But that was a positive outcome for her. But that guilt that you do feel, I felt like I was leaving her at boarding school and, abandoning her. But it's also vital to find the right place, isn't it? Because not all caring places are equal, are they? And so you really have to become an advocate for your person to find the right place and be involved there.
That's so important, yeah. And we found that out the hard way because it was a bit of a steep learning curve for us. And the place the mum was in, respite, they were lovely. It was a beautiful place, and the staff were great, but I just don't think they had the training in dementia care that they needed. So, for instance, mum, when she first got there, she was absolutely fixated on going home. And she'd just say, I want to go home, just relentlessly. And they would just say back, really adamantly, you're not going home. This is where you're staying, and she just got so frustrated. And she ended up socking one of the nurses in the jaw, which was just so embarrassing and very, very unlike mum. So if they'd been trained, they would have known, well, this is just a part of the dementia. So that because of that incident, she was basically expelled from the nursing home, which was terrible. She then had this scathing report, we'd had to take that to every nursing home we tried to get her into, which was very hard. And then the one we ended up with, the same thing happened. She would be fixated with going home. And when she said, I want to go home, they'd say to her, okay, Jeannie, well, how about you pack your bag, and it's nearly 5 o'clock. We'll have time for dinner first, and then I'll call the taxi and we'll get the taxi to come pick you up. And it was just chalk and cheese, that mum would be so relaxed. She'd be calm. She'd say, oh, thank you very much. And she'd go down and have her dinner. And then after dinner, she'd completely, of course, forget about the plan and just go off to bed quite happily. So Yeah, having training in this, how to deal with someone with dementia is really important. So if you
Mm.
can do your
And
research or your homework on that, it's worth it.
yeah, and it's something that needs to be looked at too, because it's not, it's a growing disease, isn't it? I mean, there's so many more people being diagnosed with it, and you can't, you need that specialized care. And also, you want your loved one to be well looked after the way you would look after them, but with obviously the professional experience thrown in, but with that care and compassion, not just, well, this is a number in an aged care home, and we won't worry about her because she won't remember anyway. So, you really do. I think that whole area needs to be a little bit more. Funded and so forth, so we get the right people looking after. We can, because we're entrusting our loved ones with these people and hoping that they're going to have the right care. Um, so let's just take a little step back. What when you first found out, what effect did it have on you and your husband and your family, your children? Because you've got, I think you said you've got 4 children, and so what was that like? Because it was probably the first time any of you had been exposed to someone with this condition.
Yes, it definitely was. And yeah, it was absolutely devastating, and the fact that they say it's a degenerative disease, and you think, okay, I think still my dad was thinking, oh well, she'll get better, but that the reality is it won't get better. It's only going to get worse, and it's very hard to get your head around where it's going. You just don't have a clear pathway ahead because there's so many different symptoms and so many different types of dementia. It's very hard to sort of imagine what it's going to look like in a month or a year, or we didn't know what was coming. So it was very confusing and just very sad. And it did affect all of us. I think each of the kids, because mum and dad had 7 grandkids, and each of the grandchildren sort of dealt with it in their own way as well, because mum was very close to her grandchildren. So that was
Mm,
also really hard. There's one point where mum met my son Sam, and she looked at him and he said, Nana, it's me, and she just looked at him blankly and didn't know who he was. And so he was
mm,
just absolutely gutted by that. Yeah, so it was really hard. It took its toll, especially the violent and aggressive part of mum that we'd never seen before, and she'd be calling me names and things like that. And I just had to keep thinking, this is not really mum. This is just a disease. I had to keep telling myself that over and
mm.
over.
Mm. And I think with your dad too, you've mentioned that he led a fairly healthy lifestyle as well as your mum. So he was probably thinking, oh, she hasn't got that. I mean, look at her. She looks after herself. She's fit, she's healthy, but some things you just can't avoid. Like I like to think that I stay healthy and fit too, but you just never know what's going to happen. You just try and give yourself the best chance with anything in
That's
life, don't you?
Yeah.
I was listening to you on the ABC. You had an interview and you talked about the long goodbye. And I wondered if we could just talk a little bit about that, because that must be, I mean, there's so many emotions that's going through, you must go through over the whole
Mm,
course of the time, the 8 years that you said that she was from diagnosis.
yeah, that's right. Well, I think particularly with the frontal lobe dementia, it's a goodbye to the personality as well. So you're not just, yeah, your mother turns into someone completely different. That's what happened to us. So it was a gradual, it was gradual, but you'd think, well, this is just doesn't seem like mum anymore. And I'd say something to her and she'd respond in a way that it was completely out of character. And then, yeah, just the different phases it went through. At the start, she was very angry and aggressive. And every time I'd go and visit, she'd be just angry, get me out of here. And so again, you just felt so guilty. And then the next little phase was where she'd just cry. Every time I go and see her, she'd just be crying and weeping and saying, I don't know what's happening to me. And And then I'd try, when I'd leave, I'd give her a big cuddle and say goodbye, and she'd sort of be clawing at the window and crying. It was just so hard. And then there'd be other times where she just was so vague, didn't really know I was there, just completely phased out. So I may as well have not been there because she didn't even, there was no interaction. So in a way, you are saying goodbye the whole time, realizing that your mother is just slipping away, or your loved one, whoever it is. They're just slipping away. They're becoming less and less like themselves. That's really hard. So you do your grieving along the way. And every time I'd visit, actually go back to the car and just have a big cry because it just was so hard. Yeah, sorry, I'm getting
So,
emotional just thinking about that. But
yeah,
yeah, it's hard.
sorry, yeah, it's hard for you to talk about. Did you actually feel the need to get some professional help for yourself or the family with a bit of counselling or ways for you to be able to cope with the situation?
Yes, I did at the beginning. I did because it was such a big shock. I did go and see a counselor, and that really did help. Yeah, that was great just to talk it through with someone who was totally impartial with their situation. Yeah, so that did very much help.
Mm,
Um,
mm.
yeah.
And did you do anything else that what were your coping mechanisms? How did you get through those times after you've gone to visit your mum and then you're sort of falling apart in the car because you're trying to keep it together when you're inside with her? What were your coping mechanisms that you might have used?
I think I just did a lot of walking and yeah, I did. I have got some close friends that I could talk to, and obviously my husband and my kids. I think talking it through is helpful. But often with friends, it's very, very hard for them to know exactly what you're going through. They'd
Mm,
say, "How's your mum?" And I mean, you can't explain it really. What you can't say, "Oh, she's absolutely terrible." It's
mm,
just a diabolical situation. You can't really say that, and you can't convey that very clearly. So you just say, "Oh yeah, she's okay." She's pretty much the same. Um, so it was helpful to have someone like my dad or my brother or husband to talk to, and they knew exactly what it was like because they're going
yeah,
through it
yeah.
too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's good that you were able to do that because sometimes, people who are going through something together just don't want to talk about it and they try to shut themselves off from it also. And that adds another layer to the stress and everything else. So let's talk about the book, Dementia, Who Are You and What Have You Done with My Mother? Now, why did you actually write the book? Because there are some when I received some information on the book and you have got other area documents and books that have been written about it and that sort of thing. So, what was your purpose for writing the book?
Mm. Yeah. So when we were going through it, I would have loved to have a book like this, just somebody else's experience that I could relate to. What I really wanted something um, that could show me that I wasn't alone. So my hope was that the book would be a comfort and a support to people that are going through it, just to know that they're not alone, and something that they can relate to, and also for those who don't understand what it's like, a bit of an insight into just a close look at what it's like to live with someone or go through the experience of having a loved one suffer from dementia. So that's
Mm,
what I was hoping. And yeah, the feedback that I have received so far has been very heartening because it's been just that. People have said, "Oh, it was so nice to know that someone else was going through it."
mm.
So that's very encouraging. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
because
very
there's not many books written from, say, the daughter's point of view or, a relative like that, that sort of helps people identify and go, oh, yeah, okay, she's going through exactly what I did with, or what I'm experiencing with my parent or loved one, whoever it is. Um, did it, did you become, like before this happened, did you know much about dementia or did your, learning start from when your mum was diagnosed?
Yep, that's when it started. I knew nothing. I knew only what you see in the news and the media about, I knew Hazel Hawke had Alzheimer's disease. You hear about it and you just think, oh, it's just mainly just a memory loss thing that people get when they're old. I didn't really know much about it at all. So
Mm.
yeah, I was hungry for information. So I did a lot of reading, joined a couple of websites, and did a little short course as well on what dementia was. Yeah, just tried to get as much information as I could. Yeah, so you're right, there are a lot of books about the topic of dementia, sort of from a medical perspective, or even from the sufferer themselves. But there's not really kind of a memoir type book about living with someone with dementia. Yeah,
Mm,
so
mm.
that's what I
And
wanted
of
to make.
course, yeah, and I think we sort of listen to it and we don't want to acknowledge it could happen, so we sort of put it to the side and oh, it might not happen to us or whatever. But there's even, the early onset dementia now, and there is a lot more that we're hearing about it, and that must be terrifying as well. So is it an hereditary?
Yeah, I think if you have a parent with dementia, you have a much higher chance of getting it yourself.
And that can be a bit confronting too, can't it?
Very much so. Yes, having seen how it pans out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are there things we can do, or like, for example, if you've got a history of cancer in the family, like I do, I go and have my mammogram, I have my colonoscopy, I go for other tests as well for heart and whatever, just to sort of preempt things or just to see how things are going. Is there something you can do about that, or is it like that, or do you have to wait until the signs are there before they'll think about giving you a scan? I think there's also that genetic test you can do for breast cancer as well. So, is there something like that in
Mm.
place that you can do?
Well, not at the moment, but they are really working on that, the research side of things. So hopefully there will be some sort of test that you can do to determine whether or not you are predisposed to getting it. I think all the things you mentioned before, keeping fit, keeping your mind active, maybe learning a language, or, learning how to play an instrument or something like that, just keeping your brain active, reading, those sorts of things. I mean, they're not going to prevent it, but they might help um, with the severity of it, or yeah. But the most important thing, I think, is the research that's happening and all the money
Mm.
being poured into that. It's important, isn't it?
Yeah, very.
Because they say you might have said this already in your intro, but by 2050, there's going to be over 1 million Australians with dementia. It's a
Mm.
growing
Mm.
concern because of our aging population. Yeah. So
Exactly. Yeah.
research is
Um,
very important.
Yeah, so look, we're sort of coming towards the end of our conversation today, and it's must be difficult for you reliving it all and having to talk about things like that you went through and that your mum went through. But do you have any advice for others? Firstly, we've talked about someone who might be predisposed, and we ways we can keep healthy. But what advice would you give to someone that is in your situation? Their loved one has been diagnosed, and they're looking at it from that point of view. What's some of your advice that you could give?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's obviously very difficult, a very difficult situation. So it is good to have someone that you can talk to. That's important. And just take every day as it comes. You never know what it's going to be like when you go to visit or when you come in contact with them. So just take them at face value, and don't try and expect too much. Don't expect them to be like they were, and just try and lower your expectations. I think that's really important, and just to take them as they are. If they don't remember who you are, then you might be just a loved friend, or um, someone from their past that they think you are, but just go along with that and just love them for who they are at the moment. I think that's
Mm,
important, just
mm.
hard as that is.
Yeah. Did you ever take memories in to your mum, like photos or things like that that might spark something occasionally? Or because I think sometimes is that and I'm not knowledgeable on this, but I don't know if it's Alzheimer's or that, but sometimes they can remember things from early on in their life rather than recent uh, memories.
Yeah, that was the case for Mum to start with. She was reminiscing about her childhood, things that she hadn't talked about for a long time, but she couldn't remember her grandkids' names, that sort of thing.
Mm.
I took a digital photo frame, which was good at the beginning because then every time it rolled over, I could tell Mum who the person was. But after a while, they just became faces and she didn't really know who they were. And I tried, we looked through photo albums and things like that, or I'd talk about them, but it just made her anxious because she didn't know who
Yeah, who
anyone
it
was.
was. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
suppose
yeah,
a positive out of all that heartache is that if she did talk about her earlier life, and she maybe hadn't talked about it before, you would have got a different insight into your mum. It's a regret I always have because mum died at 63 and dad at 66, and I never really asked them questions that I think now I wish I'd have asked that, or I wish I'd have known about that. And so, I suppose out of all that horrible situation, learning a little bit more about your mum in her younger years might have been, you know, helpful for you as well.
yeah. That was a nice little insight. It was, and the relationship she had with her siblings and that sort of thing. I hadn't really heard much about that, so yeah, that's a good
Mm.
positive to come out of it.
Yeah,
If there is.
well, you've got to try and find something, haven't you? So, as I said, we're coming to the end, and I do have a question I want to ask you. But before that, Sarah, are you doing any book tours, or are you promoting the book, or have you got another book that you think you might want to write, or what's the future holding for Sarah?
It's a good question. I haven't really done a book tour as such, but I've done a few library talks and a few little talks in a couple of nursing homes as well. And I'm open to doing more if anyone would like me to come and talk. Um, I would like to write another book, but yeah, I'm thinking about that right now, just ticking away in the background. I'm not sure what to write about, but yeah, I would like to write another book. I've enjoyed the experience of writing a book. Yeah, so
Hmm. Hmm.
hopefully I've got
And
another
it's
couple
not
of books
some.
in me.
Yeah, you might be a new career path for you, but it's not something that you can do overnight. I have a friend who's an author, and she's saying to me, "Oh, I'm behind on my words for my deadline and this sort of thing." But I'm always amazed at how she can produce something. But I think it would have been definitely a labor of love for you to produce the book. And to just share what you and your family have been through.
Yeah, it was therapeutic, I think, for me to write it all down and sort of document it all. I think it was quite therapeutic and it was a good exercise for me as well in getting through it and being able to cope.
Yes,
Yeah.
a bit like journaling, but you've taken it to the next level where you can share that with others, and hopefully they are going to benefit from it. And I'm also going to be putting all the links to you and your book in the show notes so that people can find you and get a copy of the book and learn more about you. So before we finish today, Sarah, this is a question I ask all of my guests with no notice, by the way. So, what does being a woman living well mean to you?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? Uh, oh, that's a great question. I think living well. So I think just um, doing what you love, making time to do things that you really love and things that you will enjoy. Um, Relationships are really important, aren't they, in living well, I think. So having
Mm,
good relationships, good friendships, um, spending time with people that you love, and not letting life just pass you by. I think stopping and smelling the roses, it's a bit of a cliche, but I think that's really important. And yeah, just making the most of your time. That's one thing I've learned with mum. Just make the most of your time. Don't waste time, but use it wisely, and yeah, spend it with people and people that you love. That's what I'd say.
Great advice. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Sarah. It's been a pleasure meeting you and hearing your story and the story of your mum. It's obviously not an easy path, and it can be very emotional. So I appreciate you chatting with me about that today, and congratulations on the book, Dementia, Who Are You and What Have You Done with My Mother? And I would recommend that to all the listeners today. So take care, and hopefully we can chat again in the future.
Thanks so much, Sue. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been lovely to meet you. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Well, that was an emotional conversation that I had with Sarah today. Having lost my own mum many years ago now, there's nothing like your mum, and it's a horrible time when you lose them, and especially in this case where Sarah's mum had dementia, and it was really a long goodbye. So I hope that you've enjoyed the interview today, and that you'll share it with a friend. Check out Sarah's book, because we may all have to face this. You never know whether we will have a friend or family, or even ourselves might be affected. So take a look at her book, and I hope you've enjoyed the episode. So that's it for today. I'll see you next time, and remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, be a woman living life your way. Bye for now.